One wrong table can change a life faster than a winning lottery ticket. And for Madison Cole, it started with a trembling hand on the glass door of a restaurant she could barely afford to enter. The soft hum of conversation floated through the dining room like music, low and elegant, mixed with the faint clink of silverware against white porcelain plates. Golden light spilled across the marble floors. Waiters moved like shadows in black jackets. Every table looked polished, perfect, expensive. Madison did not. In the reflection of the front window, she saw the truth before anyone else could say it. Her navy dress came from a thrift store on West 38th Street. The hem had been stitched twice by hand. Her black flats had a scuff near the toe that no amount of rubbing could hide. Her curls were pinned back with a drugstore clip, and her fingers were wrapped so tightly around her phone that the screen lit up against her palm. "Table 12, she whispered. "Just table 12. You promised Clara you would not run this time." She took one breath, then another, and stepped inside like she belonged there, even though every quiet laugh and every expensive perfume in the room seemed to remind her that she did not. The hostess smiled politely, but Madison was already scanning past her, searching for the blind date she had been pushed into for weeks. Clara had said his name was Ethan. A nice accountant. A little shy. Probably wearing a gray blazer. At the far corner, beside a wall of glowing wine bottles, a man sat alone in a charcoal suit, his dark hair neat, his watch simple but clearly not cheap. He was looking down at his phone, unreadable, reserved, exactly the way Clara had described. Madison's heart kicked hard. There he is. Before fear could drag her backward, she crossed the room, stopped beside his table, and forced a smile bright enough to cover every nerve inside her. "Hi, you must be Ethan. I am Madison. I am so sorry if I look like I almost turned around 3 times outside because I absolutely did." The man looked up. For half a second his expression went still. His eyes, deep gray and surprisingly warm, moved from her face to the empty chair across from him, then back again. He opened his mouth as if to correct her. At that exact moment his phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen from a business partner canceling dinner. Madison saw only the hesitation, not the name at the top. "Oh no," she said quickly, already sitting because panic had taken control of her body. "Clara warned me you were quiet." "That is fine. I talk too much when I am nervous, so honestly this might balance out." A faint smile touched his mouth. Something softened in him. "Right," he said slowly, closing his phone. "Blind dates are unpredictable." Madison laughed, too relieved to notice the careful pause. "That is the nicest way anyone has ever described emotional gambling with appetizers." He leaned back, studying her like she had interrupted not a dinner, but a life he had grown tired of living. "I am Daniel," he said. Madison froze for a breath, then laughed again, embarrassed. "Daniel. Right. Clara said Ethan's middle name might be Daniel. Or maybe I imagined that because I was stress cleaning my apartment while she talked." He should have stopped her then. He knew that. Daniel Hayes, founder of Hayes Meridian Tech, the man whose face had been in Forbes, the man waiting for a private investor meeting that no longer existed, should have told this woman she was at the wrong table. But she was looking at him like he was ordinary. Not powerful. Not useful. Not a headline. Just a man in a suit who might be nervous too. So he let the mistake breathe. "What do you do, Madison?" he asked. She touched the edge of her napkin, twisting it once. "I am a waitress at a diner in Queens. Double shifts most weeks. Glamorous, I know. But it keeps the lights on mostly. And I draw when I can." She tapped the worn sketchbook peeking from her tote bag. "Nothing fancy. Just faces, subway stations, people who think no one is noticing them." Daniel's eyes lowered to the sketchbook. "You notice people?" "Someone should," she said, then looked down, surprised by her own honesty. "What about you? Clara said you work with numbers." He almost smiled. "Something like that. Tech apps, systems, things people pretend to understand at parties." Madison grinned, her shoulders finally dropping. "Perfect. I know nothing about tech, so you can sound impressive with almost no effort." For the first time all evening, Daniel laughed, not the polite kind he used in boardrooms, but a real one that caught him off guard. And Madison, who had walked in feeling small beneath the chandelier light, suddenly felt seen. Neither of them noticed the real Ethan waiting at table 12 near the front window, checking his watch. Neither of them noticed Madison's phone buzzing inside her coat pocket. And neither of them understood yet that this beautiful mistake was already moving toward a truth that would break her heart before it changed her life. Madison's phone buzzed for the fourth time before she finally noticed it. But by then the candle between them had burned lower, the waiter had refilled their water twice, and Daniel had forgotten the cold language of contracts waiting in his briefcase. She glanced down, still smiling from something he had said about people pretending to understand technology at parties, and the color slowly left her face. The message on her screen was simple. Madison, I am at table 12. Are you here? Ethan. For one suspended second, the restaurant noise faded into a soft blur. Her eyes lifted from the phone to Daniel, then to the small brass number on the edge of his table. 6. Not 12. Table 6. The napkin slipped from her fingers. Oh my gosh, she whispered. Daniel's smile faded, not because he was angry, but because he already knew the moment had arrived. Madison stood so quickly her chair gave a sharp little scrape against the floor, and 3 nearby guests turned to look. You are not Ethan. He rose halfway, careful, calm. Madison, I can explain. No, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Her words came out in a rush, thin and breathless. I just sat down and talked your ear off for almost an hour and you just let me. I thought you were my blind date. I told you about my landlord. I told you about my sketchbook. I told you I cried in a grocery store because eggs were too expensive. Her cheeks burned bright under the golden restaurant light. Daniel took one small step around the table. You did nothing wrong. It was a mistake. A mistake I made in front of a complete stranger in a restaurant where one salad costs more than my electric bill. She grabbed her tote bag, nearly knocking the sketchbook loose, and pressed it hard against her side. I have to go. Madison, wait. But she was already moving, weaving past velvet chairs and polished shoes, her eyes fixed on the exit as if the door were the only place in the world with air. At the front of the restaurant, a man in a gray blazer lifted his hand uncertainly. Madison. She looked at him, saw the real Ethan, kind-eyed and confused, and humiliation crashed over her all over again. I am so sorry, she said, not even slowing down. I cannot do this tonight. Then she pushed through the glass door into the chilly Manhattan evening, where March wind hit her face and finally gave her permission to breathe. Outside, the city was bright and indifferent. Yellow cabs hissed through puddles. Steam rose from a street grate. Madison walked fast for 2 blocks before stopping beneath a flickering bus shelter, pressing one hand to her chest as if she could hold herself together by force. What is wrong with me? She whispered. In her tote bag, the corner of her sketchbook had bent from how tightly she had clutched it, and that small damage somehow hurt more than the whole disaster. That sketchbook was the one thing she never let the world touch carelessly. Inside were subway riders, diner customers, old men feeding pigeons in Bryant Park, mothers counting change at corner stores, and one unfinished dream drawn over and over again. A tiny art studio with wide windows, white walls, and her name painted on the glass. But dreams did not pay rent. Dreams did not stop her landlord from sliding notices under her door. Dreams did not make her belong in places with marble floors and candlelight. Across town, Daniel remained standing beside table 6 long after she disappeared. The waiter approached carefully. Sir, would you like the check? Daniel looked at the empty chair, at the water glass with the faint print of Madison's lipstick on the rim, at the space where her nervous hands had twisted the napkin. Yes, he said quietly. And bring the bill for table 12 as well. The waiter blinked. Of course, sir. Daniel sat back down, but the restaurant felt different now, too polished, too quiet, too rehearsed. He had sat through acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars without losing focus. He had fired executives without a tremor in his voice. Yet one waitress from Queens, with scuffed shoes and honest eyes, had walked out carrying the only real conversation he had had in months. Later that night, Madison unlocked the door to her 4th-floor walk-up in Astoria, her feet aching from the subway stairs. The apartment was small enough that the kitchen light reached the bed, and the radiator clanged like an old man clearing his throat. Clara looked up from the couch, one eyebrow raised. So, Madison dropped her tote on the table and covered her face. I sat at the wrong table. Clara slowly lowered her mug. How wrong? Madison sank into the chair. The kind of wrong that was handsome, kind, funny, and absolutely not my date. Clara tried not to smile. And? Madison opened her sketchbook to a fresh page, but instead of drawing the studio, Her pencil moved on its own, forming the curve of Daniel's thoughtful eyes. "And now I hope I never see him again," she said softly, even as the sketch proved she did not mean it. The next morning, Madison woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window, air conditioner, and Clara calling her name from the kitchen like the apartment was bigger than one room and a narrow hallway. Madison rolled onto her back, stared at the cracked ceiling, and for 3 beautiful seconds forgot everything. Then table 6 came back. Daniel's gray eyes. The candlelight. The way he had laughed like she had surprised him. The way she had run. She dragged a pillow over her face. "I am moving to Oregon," she announced. Clara appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee, unimpressed. "You do not have Oregon money." "I have emotional Oregon money." "That is different." Clara handed her a mug and glanced at the sketchbook open on the table. Madison followed her gaze. Too late. There he was, drawn in soft pencil lines before midnight regret had fully set in. Not perfect. Not polished. Just the exact moment he had listened to her like every word mattered. Clara lifted an eyebrow. "For someone you hope never to see again, you gave him very nice cheekbones." Madison snatched the book shut. It was practice. For what? Public humiliation studies? Before Madison could answer, her phone rang. The diner. 10 minutes later, she was tying her apron over a faded black dress and stepping into the morning rush at Rosie's, a 24-hour place under the elevated train in Queens, where coffee was always hot, the floor always sticky, and regulars knew when you could spare a smile. By 9, she had balanced 6 plates along her arm, refilled booth 3 twice, and apologized to a delivery driver for a kitchen delay she did not cause. Her rent notice sat folded in her apron pocket like a secret weight. $580 short by Friday. Every time she moved, the paper brushed her hip, reminding her that one beautiful conversation could not change the math of being broke. At the counter, Mr. Alvarez, a retired bus mechanic with kind eyes, watched her sketch a sleeping customer on the back of a receipt between orders. "You still drawing your people, Maddie?" "Only when they tip badly," she said, sliding him toast. He chuckled, then pointed at the receipt. "You should be in a gallery, not carrying pancakes for men who call you sweetheart." Madison smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Galleries are for people who know the right doors. I know the subway doors. They close fast and hit your back." Just then the bell above the diner door jingled. Madison looked up because every waitress does, and her heart stumbled so hard she nearly dropped the coffee pot. Daniel stood just inside, rain darkening the shoulders of his navy overcoat, looking completely out of place between the gum machine and the handwritten sign that said "Free refills, no drama." For a second nobody moved. The diner noise continued around them. Plates clattering, coffee pouring, a cook calling order up. Madison's fingers tightened around the pot. Daniel saw her and gave a small, careful smile, the kind people use when approaching a frightened animal or an apology. She walked over before fear could decide for her. "Are you lost again?" she asked. His smile deepened, but he did not joke back right away. "Maybe. Or maybe I owed someone an apology and had to follow the only clue she gave me." Madison narrowed her eyes. "I told you I worked at a diner in Queens. There are about 1 million diners in Queens." He glanced around, almost sheepish. "I tried 6. Her anger should have arrived stronger than it did. Instead, something softer and more dangerous opened in her chest. "6 diners? You have a strange understanding of boundaries, Daniel." "I know. And I am sorry. For letting the mistake go too far. For not correcting you the second you sat down. I had no excuse except that you were the first person in a long time who talked to me like I was just a person." Madison looked away because that landed too close to the part of her that had felt the same. A customer waved from booth 4, and she lifted one finger, asking for a moment. Daniel noticed the rent notice slipping from her apron pocket before she tucked it back in. His eyes changed, not with pity but with quiet recognition. That almost made her defensive. "Do not look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you are about to solve me." "I am not a broken phone screen." Daniel nodded slowly. "Fair. Then let me start smaller. Coffee. Here. Public place. Real names this time. No pretending." Madison studied him. The expensive coat. The tired honesty. The man who had searched 6 diners for a waitress he could have easily forgotten. Finally, she reached for a mug and set it on the counter between them. Coffee is $2.75. Refills are free. Forgiveness costs extra. Daniel sat on the red vinyl stool, his eyes never leaving hers. Then I will start with coffee and earn the rest. By the time Daniel finished his first cup of coffee, Madison had decided he was either the most patient man in New York or the most dangerous kind of charming, the kind who did not push, did not perform, simply stayed. He sat on the red vinyl stool with both hands around the chipped diner mug as if it were something worth holding carefully, while Madison moved between tables, refilling coffee, carrying plates, smiling when she had to, and stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. He did not ask about the folded rent notice again. He did not offer money. He did not make her feel small. That bothered her more than pity would have, because pity was easy to reject. Respect was harder. When the breakfast rush finally thinned, she leaned against the counter in front of him and set down a fresh slice of apple pie. I did not order this, Daniel said. Madison shrugged. It is slightly burned on one side, so technically it cannot be sold with dignity. He picked up the fork, amused. And you are giving it to me because forgiveness requires carbohydrates. He laughed softly, and the sound warmed something behind her ribs before she could stop it. For a while, they talked like ordinary people in an ordinary diner on a rainy Thursday. He told her he grew up in Buffalo, that he hated black coffee but drank it anyway because his father used to say cream was for people who had time to be gentle with themselves. Madison told him about Queens, about learning to draw on brown paper grocery bags, about her mother working hotel laundry until her hands cracked every winter, about the first time she saw a painting at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and stood so still a guard asked if she was lost. I was not lost, she said, wiping the counter with slow circles. I was just shocked that someone was allowed to make something beautiful and put it on a wall for everyone to take seriously. Daniel looked at her, then really looked, and the diner seemed to quiet around them. Your work deserves that too. Madison rolled her eyes, but her throat tightened. You have seen one napkin sketch and one accidental portrait drawn during emotional damage. That is not a portfolio. Then show me one. The request came gently, without pressure, but it still made her hand freeze on the rag. Nobody asked to see the sketchbook unless they were being polite. Nobody knew what it cost to open it. She glanced toward the kitchen, toward the clock, toward any excuse. Then Mr. Alvarez called from the end of the counter, show him, Maddie. Some of us are trying to witness destiny with our toast. Madison gave him a look, but he only lifted his coffee in surrender. Fine, she muttered, reaching into her tote bag. But if you say something fake like interesting use of line, I will charge you $6 for that burned pie. Daniel raised one hand solemnly. No fake lines. She opened the sketchbook between them. Page by page, the diner disappeared. There were tired nurses on the late train, a delivery man asleep against a stack of boxes, Clara laughing with her head thrown back, Mr. Alvarez holding his toast like a royal decree, an old woman feeding pigeons in Bryant Park, and then the studio drawings. Again and again the same dream. Tall windows, white walls, a wooden floor, sunlight falling across unfinished canvases. Madison Cole painted on the glass in careful letters. Daniel turned the pages slower after that. He did not compliment quickly. He let the silence honor the work. That made Madison's eyes sting. Finally he touched the edge of the page, not the drawing itself. This is not a hobby, he said. This is a place you have been trying to reach. Madison closed the book a little too fast. It is a place with rent I cannot pay. The words slipped out before pride could stop them. Daniel's expression softened, but he stayed careful. Then what keeps you drawing? She looked toward the window, where rain blurred the elevated tracks into silver lines. Because when I draw people, they matter for a second. Even the ones nobody sees. Especially them. Daniel went very still, and for the first time Madison saw something lonely beneath the expensive coat and controlled smile. Before he could answer, his phone lit up on the counter. The screen showed 3 words. Board meeting delayed. Under it, a name Madison did not recognize, followed by Hayes Meridian Tech. She barely noticed it then. To her, it was only another company. Another piece of Daniel's vague tech world. He turned the phone face down quickly, not fast enough to seem guilty, but fast enough to plant a small question in the room. Madison saw it. Daniel saw that she saw it. And between them, beneath the smell of coffee and rain, the first shadow of the truth waited. The question Madison noticed on Daniel's phone did not become a conversation that morning, because the lunch rush arrived like a wave and swept them both back into motion. She took orders, poured coffee, balanced plates, and told herself not to care why a man who claimed to work in tech had board meetings delayed like weather reports. Daniel stayed until noon, left a normal tip because she had warned him not to do anything dramatic, and wrote only 3 words on the receipt before walking into the rain. "Thank you, Madison." She found the note 2 hours later and hated how carefully she folded it into her sketchbook. Over the next week, Daniel became a quiet interruption in the hard pattern of her life. He came by after morning meetings he never fully explained, always ordered coffee he still did not like, and never took the same stool unless the diner was empty, as if he refused to act like he owned even a corner of her world. Sometimes he brought nothing. Sometimes he brought small things that did not feel like charity. A museum flyer tucked inside a newspaper, a sharpened pencil because hers had snapped, a list of free gallery nights in Manhattan printed from a public website so she could not accuse him of buying access. Madison accepted those with suspicion. Then with a smile she tried to hide. One Friday evening, after her landlord gave her a 7-day extension because Clara covered part of the rent and Madison handed over every dollar from her tips, Daniel found her outside Rosie's under the awning, rolling her sore shoulders while the elevated train thundered overhead. "Long shift?" he asked. 12 hours, she said. "My feet have filed a formal complaint." He looked at the sketchbook under her arm. "Are you too tired for one free gallery night?" Madison stared at him. "That depends. Is this a date or an educational ambush?" Daniel smiled. "Both if I am lucky." She should have said no. Instead, 20 minutes later, she was on the subway beside him, the city flashing by in dark windows, her thrift store coat brushing his expensive sleeve. At a small gallery in Chelsea, Madison forgot to be guarded. She moved from painting to painting with quiet hunger. Leaning close, stepping back, tilting her head. Daniel watched more than he spoke. He watched her eyes change in front of color. He watched her fingers twitch as if she were drawing invisible lines in the air. In one corner, she stopped before a portrait of a woman seated by a laundromat window, tired hands folded in her lap, dignity shining through the gray light. Madison did not speak for a long time. "My mom would have understood this one," she finally said. Daniel stood beside her, careful with the silence. "Tell me about her." Madison swallowed. "She worked hard. Too hard. She used to say rich people looked through her like glass, but artists looked at her like she had a story. That is why I started drawing faces. I wanted people like her to be seen." Daniel's voice softened. "She would be proud of you." Madison looked at him, and something almost fragile passed between them. "You say things like you mean them." "I do mean them." "That is the problem," she whispered, then looked away first. After the gallery, they walked nearly a mile because Madison said cabs made her feel wasteful and Daniel said walking helped him think. The sidewalks glittered after rain. Food trucks sent warm steam into the cold air. At a corner cart, Daniel bought 2 paper cups of hot chocolate only after Madison insisted on paying for one of them herself. They stood near the curb, shoulder to shoulder, watching traffic slide through puddles of red and gold. "You never talk about your work," she said. Daniel's hand tightened slightly around his cup. "It is complicated. Most work is complicated. Mine involves people assuming they know me before I speak." Madison gave a small laugh. "Try wearing an apron. People assume you do not speak at all." He looked at her then with a seriousness that made the street noise fade. "That is exactly why I like being with you. You do not do that." She should have asked more. She felt the question rise, felt the shadow from his phone return. But his eyes were tired, and her own heart was tired of protecting itself every second. So she let the moment stay soft. When he walked her to the subway entrance, he did not try to touch her hand. He only said, "I would like to see you again somewhere that is not a diner or a mistake." Madison hugged her sketchbook to her chest. "Then do not make me regret trusting you, Daniel." His smile flickered, almost sad. "I am trying not to." But as she descended the stairs into the rumble of the station, Daniel remained on the sidewalk above, his phone lighting again with a message from his assistant. "The Hayes Meridian Charity Gala is confirmed for Saturday. Press will expect your keynote." And this time, The truth he had delayed was no longer waiting quietly. It was walking straight toward them. By Saturday afternoon, Madison had convinced herself that the charity gala had nothing to do with Daniel, nothing to do with the company name she had seen on his phone, and nothing to do with the strange ache in her chest every time he said his work was complicated. She was only going because Clara had volunteered them to help with coat check through a community arts nonprofit, and because the event paid $80 in cash at the end of the night. $80 meant groceries, laundry, and maybe one new set of charcoal pencils if she was reckless. The gala was held in a glass tower near Bryant Park, the kind of building Madison usually passed without looking up because looking up made her feel even smaller. Inside, everything shone. Silver trays moved through the crowd. Women in satin gowns laughed softly beneath crystal lights. Men in tailored tuxedos spoke in low voices about donations, acquisitions, and city grants, words that floated above Madison like a language from a country she had never been invited to visit. She stood behind the coat check counter in a plain black dress and borrowed flats, pinning numbers to wool coats that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. Clara nudged her gently. "You look like you are about to sketch every rude person in this room with extra wrinkles." Madison gave a thin smile. "That is called artistic justice." But even as she joked, her fingers kept brushing the sketchbook hidden inside her tote under the counter. She had brought it for comfort, like a secret piece of herself. An older woman in pearls dropped her coat onto the counter without looking at Madison. "Careful with that, dear. It is Italian cashmere." Madison took it with both hands. "Of course, ma'am." The woman's eyes flicked over Madison's simple dress, the scuffed flats, the service badge clipped near her shoulder. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that was not kindness at all. "These events are so good for girls like you. You get to see what ambition looks like up close." Madison felt the words land clean and cold. Clara's face tightened beside her, but Madison only placed the coat on the rack and handed over the claim ticket. "Thank you, ma'am. I will keep it somewhere safe." The woman moved on, already forgetting her. Madison looked down at her hands, steady but pale. For a moment she was back at the restaurant, back in every room where money made people taller and everyone else invisible. Then a familiar voice came from behind her. "Madison." She turned too quickly. Daniel stood just beyond the counter in a black tuxedo, more polished than she had ever seen him, but his eyes were the same. Warm. Alarmed. Guilty. Her heart lifted before her mind could stop it. "Daniel? What are you doing here?" He did not answer fast enough. Around them several heads turned. A woman with a headset hurried toward him, whispering, "Mr. Hayes, the keynote starts in 5 minutes." The words struck Madison before she understood them. Mr. Hayes. Not Daniel from a diner. Not Daniel who worked in tech. Mr. Hayes. Daniel's face changed as he saw realization spread across hers. "Madison, please let me explain." But the room had already begun to answer for him. Near the stage, a master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, smiling broadly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's host and the founder of Hayes Meridian Tech, one of New York's most influential young philanthropists, Daniel Hayes." Applause rose like a wave. Cameras turned. Spotlights shifted. And Madison stood frozen behind the coat check counter, holding a stranger's cashmere coat, while the man who had eaten burned pie in her diner walked toward the stage as if the whole room belonged to him. Every hidden detail clicked into place. The board meeting, the overcoat, the careful pauses, the way he had searched 6 diners with the ease of someone who could afford to waste a morning, the way he had listened to her dreams without ever admitting he had the power to open doors she had spent her life standing outside of. Daniel reached the microphone, but his eyes found Madison first. For 1 second, the millionaire on the stage looked exactly like the man at table 6, unsure and exposed. Madison's throat tightened. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to be angry. She wanted terribly for none of it to matter. Daniel began speaking, his voice steady for the crowd but not for her. "Tonight is about visibility," he said. "About the people this city overlooks, the workers, caregivers, artists, and neighbors whose dignity should never depend on wealth or status." The room applauded politely, but Madison could barely hear it. Visibility. The word that had once felt sacred between them now felt borrowed. She reached beneath the counter, pulled out her tote, and clutched the sketchbook to her chest. Clara whispered, "Maddie, are you okay?" Madison shook her head. "No. I need air." As Daniel continued his speech, Madison slipped away from the counter and into the side hallway, her borrowed flats silent against the marble. She did not see Daniel pause mid-sentence. She did not see his assistant lean toward him in panic. She only reached the quiet corridor near the service elevators, pressed one hand against the cool wall, and breathed through the sting in her eyes. Then behind her footsteps came fast, controlled, familiar. Madison. She turned. Daniel stood at the end of the hallway, the applause still echoing faintly behind him, his keynote abandoned, his secret finally standing between them with nowhere left to hide. Madison stared at Daniel from the other end of the hallway, and for the first time since the night they met, he looked exactly like what he was. A man used to rooms opening for him, now standing in front of a woman who would not move an inch. The music from the ballroom drifted through the walls, soft and expensive. Somewhere beyond the double doors, people were clapping for his speech about dignity, while Madison stood beside a service elevator in borrowed shoes, trying not to let her voice break. How long were you going to let me feel stupid? Daniel flinched. Never. That was never what I wanted. But you did it anyway. Her hand tightened around the sketchbook against her chest. You sat in my diner, listened to me talk about rent, about my mother, about trying to get one drawing on one wall before I turn invisible, and the entire time you were Daniel Hayes. Founder. Millionaire. Host of the gala. The kind of man people whisper around. He took one step closer, then stopped when she stepped back. I should have told you sooner. You should have told me at table 6. The words landed hard in the quiet corridor. Daniel lowered his eyes, and Madison hated that part of her still wanted to forgive him just because he looked ashamed. I know. I was selfish. That night you looked at me like I was ordinary, and I did not want to lose that. Madison gave a small, stunned laugh, but there was no humor in it. Ordinary? Daniel, ordinary is not a costume you can wear because your real life feels lonely. Ordinary is choosing between laundry and groceries. Ordinary is smiling when people call you dear like you are furniture. Ordinary is carrying a rent notice in your apron and pretending your hands are not shaking. You do not get to borrow that because it feels refreshing. His face went pale beneath the hallway lights. You are right. No, I am tired of being right in rooms where nobody listens. She opened the sketchbook not to show him, but because holding it closed suddenly felt like protecting him from what he had done. She flipped to the drawing from the diner, the one Clara had teased her about, the one where his eyes looked honest. I drew this because I thought I had met someone who understood what it felt like to be unseen. Then tonight, I watched that same man stand under a spotlight and talk about people like me as if we were a beautiful idea for donors to applaud. Daniel's voice was low. You are not an idea to me. Then why did you let me walk around not knowing who you were? Because I was afraid that once you knew, every conversation would change. Madison looked up at him, eyes shining now. It has changed. But not because you are rich. Because you lied by silence over and over again and called it waiting for the right moment. Behind them, the ballroom doors opened briefly, releasing a burst of applause and camera flashes before closing again. Daniel's assistant appeared at the far end, anxious, but Daniel raised one hand without looking away from Madison, and she stopped. Madison saw it, the power of a single gesture, the way his world froze when he asked it to. That small movement hurt more than the speech. She smiled sadly. That is what I missed. You never had to raise your voice. Everything listened. Daniel took a breath. I can fix this. No. Her answer came fast. That is the problem. You think everything can be fixed because you have the money, the staff, the keys, the rooms. But I am not one of your projects, Daniel. I am not a charity case with curls and a sketchbook. His expression cracked. I never saw you that way. Maybe not. But you still stood above me while hiding the stairs. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The elevator chimed softly behind her. Doors sliding open to an empty service lift smelling faintly of metal and cleaning spray. Madison wiped beneath one eye with the back of her hand. Angry at the tear, angrier that he saw it. I trusted you with the only place in me that was still brave, she said. And you made me feel like the punchline of another rich man's secret. Daniel shook his head, his voice rough. Madison, please. Tell me what to do. She stepped into the elevator, clutching the sketchbook like a lifeline. Do the one thing you should have done from the beginning. Tell the truth. The doors began to close. Daniel moved forward but stopped before crossing the line. Madison held his gaze until only a narrow strip of light remained between them. And this time, Daniel, do not make it about you. The doors shut, cutting him off from the woman, the sketchbook, and the first honest consequence his money could not soften. For 3 days after the gala, Daniel did not go to Rosie's, and Madison told herself that was mercy, not absence. She worked the breakfast rush, smiled until her cheeks ached, and went home each night with her sketchbook unopened in her tote. Drawing had always been the place where the world made sense, but now every blank page felt like a question she did not want to answer. Clara tried kindness first, then sarcasm, then silence, which was how Madison knew her best friend was truly worried. On Tuesday night, while rain scratched lightly against the apartment window, Clara set a bowl of soup beside Madison and said, "He messed up, Maddie." "But you did not." Madison stared at the steam curling from the bowl. "Then why do I feel embarrassed?" "Because people with power can make honesty feel like overreacting." Madison looked at her. Clara shrugged. "What? I read sometimes." The next morning, Madison found out Daniel had taken her last words seriously in the most public way possible. A video from the gala was moving through local news feeds. Not the polished keynote his assistant had prepared, but what happened after Madison left. Daniel had walked back onto the stage, stood beneath the lights, and placed both hands on the podium. The room had quieted because wealthy rooms always know when something unscripted is happening. He had said, "I came here tonight prepared to speak about visibility, but I failed someone who trusted me with her truth. I hid behind my name and my position because I like being treated as ordinary, and that was unfair to someone who does not get to step out of ordinary life when it becomes hard." Madison watched the clip once, then again, her thumb frozen over the cracked phone screen. Daniel did not say her name. He did not turn her pain into a romantic story. He did not ask the crowd to admire him for confessing. He announced that Hayes Meridian Tech would transfer the gala's discretionary donor fund into a new independent grant for working-class artists, administered by the community arts nonprofit, not by him, not by his company, and not as a publicity campaign. Then he added, "Charity that keeps power in the giver's hands is only performance. Opportunity should have doors that open without anyone needing to be rescued by a millionaire." Madison sat very still. Clara peeked over her shoulder. "Well," she said softly, "that is annoyingly decent." Madison turned off the phone before her heart could answer. That afternoon, a woman named Denise from the community arts nonprofit came into Rosie's carrying a canvas folder and wearing sneakers with her business suit. Madison braced herself, already defensive, but Denise only ordered coffee and waited until the counter was quiet. "I am not here because Daniel Hayes sent me," she said. "In fact, his only instruction was that no one pressure you." Madison folded her arms. "But you are here." Denise smiled. "I am here because Clara submitted photographs of your sketches to our Emergency Artist Fellowship last month, before any of this happened." Madison's mouth opened, then closed. Clara suddenly became fascinated with wiping a perfectly clean table across the room. Denise slid the folder forward. "You were selected for a 3-month studio residency in Long Island City. It includes materials, mentorship, and a small living stipend." The Hayes Fund expanded the number of spots, but the selection panel never saw donor names or personal stories. They saw the work. "Your work." Madison stared at the folder as if it might vanish if she touched it. Inside was an acceptance letter, a key card, and a printed photograph of an empty studio with tall windows, white walls, and sunlight falling across a wooden floor. Her breath caught so sharply that Mr. Alvarez looked up from his toast. The room blurred. Not because Daniel had bought her dream, because someone had looked at what she made and taken it seriously. That evening, Madison went to the studio alone. The building smelled of paint, dust, and possibility. She unlocked the door with shaking fingers. The room was smaller than the ones in her drawings, but the windows were wide, and the late sun poured across the floor exactly the way she had imagined it since she was 17. On the far wall stood a plain envelope with her name on it. She almost did not open it. Inside was a single note in Daniel's handwriting. No spotlight. No favor. No rescue. Just the truth. "Your art was already enough before I ever saw it. I am sorry I made you doubt the person who showed it to me." Madison held the note for a long moment, then set it gently on the windowsill. She opened her sketchbook to the bent page from the night she ran out of the restaurant, smoothed the crease with her palm, and picked up a pencil. For the first time in days her hand moved. She drew the empty room. Then the light. Then very slowly a door left open. The first time Madison saw her name on a gallery wall, she did not cry right away. She simply stood still, one hand pressed over her heart, as if any sudden movement might wake her from it. Madison Cole was printed in clean black letters beside the entrance of the Long Island City studio. Not large, not flashy, but real. Around the room, her drawings hung in simple white frames. The nurse on the late train, Mr. Alvarez with his toast, Clara laughing in the kitchen, the woman by the laundromat window, the delivery man asleep beside boxes, and near the center, the open door she had drawn the night she decided to begin again. People moved slowly from piece to piece, not rushing, not glancing past. They leaned in. They whispered. They saw. Madison wore the same navy dress from the night at the restaurant, but this time the hem was freshly stitched, the scuffed flats replaced by simple black shoes she bought with her own fellowship stipend. Clara stood beside her, pretending not to tear up. Mr. Alvarez had come in a tie he claimed was older than half the city. Denise from the nonprofit greeted visitors by name. Nothing about the room felt like charity. Felt like proof. Madison had spent 6 weeks inside that studio, working before diner shifts, after diner shifts, and sometimes through entire nights when the city outside turned quiet and blue. Daniel had stayed away, except for one handwritten apology delivered through Denise, and one email that said he would attend only if Madison wanted him there. She had stared at that email for 2 days before typing back 4 words. "Come as yourself, please." Now, near the back of the gallery, Daniel stood alone in a dark suit without cameras, without assistants, without anyone clearing a path for him. He looked nervous in a way Madison understood. When their eyes met, he did not cross the room immediately. He waited. That small choice softened something inside her. Madison walked to him slowly, passing the framed sketch of table 6 without looking away. "You came," she said. "You asked me to come as myself. I am trying to learn who that is without the stage lights." She studied him for a moment. "And?" Daniel looked around the room, then back at her. "And I think he should have told the truth sooner. I think he should have been brave enough to lose what was not real so he could earn what was." Madison's eyes warmed, but her voice stayed steady. "I cannot be loved like a secret, Daniel. I know. And I cannot build anything with someone who sees my life as a lesson. I know that too." He reached into his coat pocket, and for one sharp second Madison stiffened, afraid of something too grand, too public, too soon. But he only pulled out a folded receipt from Rosie's, carefully preserved. "Thank you, Madison." The note he had left after that first real coffee. "Kept it," he said. "Not because it makes a good story. Because it reminds me that gratitude is not a speech. It is a practice." Madison looked at the receipt, then laughed softly through the ache in her chest. "You kept a diner receipt? You kept a sketch of me. That is different. Mine had better composition." His smile broke through, gentle and real. Across the room, Denise tapped a glass, and the gallery quieted for Madison's short thank you speech. She turned toward the people gathered there, her hands trembling only slightly. "For years I thought being seen meant being chosen by someone powerful," she said. "But I was wrong. Being seen starts when you stop hiding the honest parts of yourself. My mother taught me that every person carries a story. Tonight is for the people who work double shifts, ride late trains, count bills at kitchen tables, and still make something beautiful out of what they have left." Applause filled the room, not polished, not polite, but full. Daniel did not clap the loudest. He simply looked at her with quiet pride, and that mattered more. Months later, when spring softened New York and the first warm breeze moved through Bryant Park, Madison opened her own small studio 2 blocks from Rosie's. On the glass door, painted by her own hand, were the words Madison Cole Studio. Beneath them, smaller, almost hidden, was a tiny table number 6. Daniel noticed it the day she unlocked the door for the first time. "Is that a warning?" he asked. Madison smiled. "It is a reminder. The best mistakes still need honesty afterward." He took her hand, not to lead her inside, but to walk in beside her. 1 year later, in that same studio, surrounded by sketches, coffee cups, and the people who had loved her before the world applauded, Daniel asked Madison to marry him. No cameras, no ballroom, No borrowed spotlight. Just a ring, a trembling voice, and the receipt from Rosie's tucked inside the sketchbook where everything had begun again. Madison looked at the man who had finally learned that love was not rescue, not status, not a secret life dressed up as simplicity. Love was action. Love was truth. Love was staying ordinary when no one was watching. So she said yes, not because he was a millionaire, but because at last, he had become honest enough to be trusted with her open door.